Hi, good day. I'm Sandeep, and you're watching the Indian Weekender. Today is May 12th, 2022, and finally, after a long wait, the immigration rebalance has arrived. As we all know, that few months ago, Tourism Minister Stuart Nash had made an announcement that immigration rebalance is coming. And yesterday, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, along with Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy, announced about this immigration rebalance in a pre-budget lunch organized by Business New Zealand here in Auckland. So in this announcement, there were many implications. A lot of policy announcements were made around work visa rules, residency rules, post-study work visa rights, international students, and rights of the working rights of partners of work visa holders who would be arriving in this country in future. This whole immigration rebalance is intending to improve the efficiency of immigration in New Zealand and to enhance the quality of migrant workforce that is coming in this country. So to quote the announcement by Prime Minister, it says that we are keen to attract high-skilled migrant workforce from all around the world. So let's try to understand what this immigration rebalance is all about and speak to noted immigration lawyer Alastair McClymont and understand that how successful this rebalance would be, what it means to temporary migrants who are already in this country or who are making plans to make New Zealand their place of work and place of residence in near future. So welcome to our digital studio, Alastair.
Hi, Sandeep. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, it's our pleasure. And I think it would be a busy day for you today after that yesterday's rebalance announcement.
Yes, there was a lot of information that was released yesterday. So there was a day full of media interviews like there is today, but also just trying to understand what the implications of all of this are for our clients and employers and for the country generally.
Certainly, it is. It is a very big announcement. It is going to affect our future of New Zealand, future of work environment, and how New Zealand is going to eventually attract international students and high-skilled migrant workforces. So let's try to understand and go into some of the major catchphrase or some of the major words used in the announcement. So I think the first thing that we heard about was a new green list. So Prime Minister Ardern has announced that a new green list will be coming up, which will include 85 odd globally high in demand jobs. And they have eventually simplified the pathway to residency for those skilled people to come into New Zealand. So Alastair, can you tell us more about this green list, what it is about and how it is different from what New Zealand has got at the moment?
It's not different. So the most skill which has been put into this, because we're talking about high skilled, is in the public relations consultants who have managed to brand this and sell it to the public as something new and innovative, which is going to attract the most highly skilled migrants from around the world. But really, it's exactly the same as what existed previously with the long-term skill shortage list and the long-term skill shortage list's connection with the skilled migrant category for residency. So it's absolutely nothing new whatsoever. It's just been rebranded completely by the public relations consultants.
Sure. Now, the other thing that I have been hearing since yesterday pretty often is that which government is trying to pat their back and saying that they are going to make it easy for high-skilled workers like doctors and engineers to come to this country. So a doubt that comes to a mind is that was it not easy for them even before this list was announced or before this rebalance was announced, or
Yes.
It's going to be different for them now onwards?
No, it's exactly the same. It was always easy. So when someone was a long-term skill shortage occupation, such as a registered doctor, it was a very simple process to apply for residency under the skilled migrant category. It was very simple to get the points. The applications were prioritized, fast-tracked, and that there was a special long-term skill shortage work visa as well. Under this new system that they've got, It's very simple to get residency. It's prioritised and fast track, and there's a work visa option as well. So it's identical. It's just got a different name.
Different name. Right. Okay. And in fact, there are two categories there as well, isn't it? Like probably 59 odd jobs are listed where they can apply for residency by being offshore, and remaining probably 29 odd jobs where people are required to come and work in the country for 2 odd years on work to residence, and then they will be eligible for residence. Correct?
Yes. So with the new accredited employer work visa policy, there have been some work to residency pathways which have been abolished and no longer exist. So what they've done now is that they've created a new work to residency pathway to replace all of the ones that have been abolished. And the new work to residency pathway just basically says, look, there's a handful of jobs, I think there's around 20, in which if someone is working here in New Zealand for a period of 2 years, they will then qualify for residency after those 2 years. It's a pretty short list, and I think that the 4 occupations which might be of particular interest to your readers or listeners or viewers would be the early childhood teachers, registered early childhood teachers, I should say, the automotive electricians, diesel mechanics, and the electricians.
Right. Okay. So these are the people, if they are still overseas and wanting to come to New Zealand, they would have an easier pathway, correct?
Well, look, we don't have the details of what's required. So we don't know, well, we don't know yet whether or not there are going to be requirements for job offers from overseas for the green list people. It's very unlikely that there will be, because if someone's a registered doctor from overseas, then you just really want to get them in. The people here who are on this work to residence pathway obviously have to be here in New Zealand working for 2 years first before they're going to qualify. There is one other group of people that will qualify for residency after 2 years, and those are the people who are earning a salary at 2 times the median wage. So everybody can get their calculators out. The median wage after this policy opens in July will be $27.76. So
Right.
2 times the median wage is approximately $55 an hour, multiplied by a 40-hour week. You have to do some quick maths. So
Well, yeah.
55 times 40.
Yeah, surely. Well, it's very good to hear those kind of salaries, and it takes me. I know that I'm digressing a bit, but yes, don't you think that probably it's more like attracting the privileged people who are already getting that kind of pay bracket, and they are trying to bring them here at the cost of so-called low-skilled migrant workforces. This is one thing that I want to talk to you, Alastair.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They're basically creating a 2-tier immigration system. So there's an immigration system for the rich and well-qualified, and then the rest are basically, we're turning it into a Dubai-type labor market. Dubai, where you just have, you rely on migrant workers, you basically use and abuse them, utilize their services, and then you kick them out after they've made their contribution and they're no longer wanted. So that's basically what the government is moving towards. So when they talk about attracting high-skilled workers, I mean, yes, that's fine, that's great, but that's always existed. So what they're really just saying is that we're going to move to a Dubai-style labor market.
Well, that is one thing, actually, probably, correct me if I'm wrong, this Labour government has been very keen to work on those lines right from 2017, when they first released their immigration policy before the elections, that they were keen to attract the high wages, high-skilled workforces, and they have always been silent and non-committal toward the ordinary jobs, if I may say, like, chefs and those who are working in supermarkets or in petrol stations.
Yeah.
And gradually in last 3-4 odd years, we see that they have brought in the 3-tier system based on different wages for essential skill work visa. And they've been trying to shut the door. So do you think they have finally been able to shut the door for those so-called low-skilled migrant workforces?
Yeah, so in 2017, when these ideas first emerged in Labour Party policy developers, this was basically the idea that was created at that time. Now, why was it created in 2017? Well, because we had the highest net high migration for a generation. You might remember in 2017, that's all the media were talking about, is the incredibly high number of migrants that were coming into the country. So in response to that, the Labour Party created this policy. That was 5 years ago. Halfway through that 5-year period, of course, they then shut the borders. So the economic circumstances then turned completely upside down. So rather than having incredibly high net high migration and reliance on migrant workers, we had nobody. Yet the policy has remained identical. So we've now got a policy which has taken 5 years to implement, but was designed to deal with a situation when we had record high net high migration. And now they're applying it in an economic environment in which we have absolutely no migration whatsoever, and we have incredible labor market shortages rather than the high net migration.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what political ideology does, is that it ignores the reality of what's happening in the real world, and you just stick with your ideology regardless of anything. You just maintain that political ideology.
Yes, correct. Now, talking about this so-called, their aversion to so-called low-skilled migrant workforces, and this government is quite keen to impose a requirement upon employers to train the so-called non-existent local workforces to work in industries like, say, restaurants and supermarkets. Well, that has been their ambitious, or shall I say, cherished goal for last 4 or 5 odd years. But now they have brought in that policy. So do you think that businesses would be able to cope up with that requirement? Would they be able to train and hire the locals while the tap is being turned off for migrant workforces from overseas?
Well, I mean, this again is basic Labour Party policy, where they believe that even if there's one unemployed person in the country, then that person must be trained to do that particular job. And this has basically been their position all along. So everything that's behind this is blaming employers. Everything is the employer's fault. It's the employer's fault for not hiring Kiwis. It's the employer's fault for not training Kiwis. And it's the employer's fault for not introducing technology to replace human labor. So, we have a situation now where we have record low unemployment. It's virtually full employment. We now have international borders which are opening, and we have Kiwis, young Kiwis who haven't been able to travel and work for the last 2 years, who now suddenly see the international borders opening, and it's anticipated that we're going to lose 50,000 young Kiwis during this year to go overseas for their work experience. Yet it's still the employer's fault for not training up New Zealanders to fill these jobs. And what they call the low-skilled jobs, which also includes people who are being paid, $26 an hour or $27 an hour. For them, that's still low-skilled, and they should still be training unemployed New Zealanders to fill those jobs.
Well, I think that's quite well explained, and we will leave others, including the government and experts, to make understand that. Now, coming and talking more about that employer's fault that you're talking about, as a part of this immigration rebalance, the government has also spoken about sector-wise engagement, where what they're saying is that once the tap will be turned off, once this accredited employer work visa starts this July, probably employers will only be able to hire people or overseas migrants at a median wages of around $27.76. Yeah. And anyone lower than those will not be allowed to hire, except for some industries, some sectors. And that is where government is introducing this sector-wise arrangement. Yep. So can you explain a little bit more about that, Alastair?
Yeah, so that's it. But they're not saying that those sectors can employ people between the minimum wage and the median wage. They're saying they can only employ people below the median wage, but no less than $25 per hour. So they've identified 2 sectors, the construction and infrastructure sector and the hospitality and tourism sector. So they've also put those sectors on notice to say this is not a permanent exemption to the median wage requirement. This is just a temporary exemption because you must upskill and you must pay your workers more. So they've put the industries on notice that they will have to pay median wage at some time in the future, but they've given them a little bit extra time to get their workforce up to those sort of pay rates.
Yeah, and if I have heard Prime Minister correctly yesterday, because I was in the room when this policy was being announced, probably they have been given a notice of April 2023. So probably around 9 to 10 odd months from here, when restaurants and hospitality and the tourism sector, they will lose the ability to hire someone below $27.76. So not sure well, probably I will ask you that, knowing that we are still going through this COVID pandemic, and hospitality and tourism has been bearing the forefront. They have faced the maximum brunt of close down and lockdowns. Do you think they would be in a situation to face this new change reality where they will forced to pay more to their
well, it's interesting though, because one thing we need to add to this is that these rules only apply for employer-specific work visas. So those are people who are applying to get a work visa specific to that occupation, that industry, that region, and that employer. It doesn't apply to the working holiday visa people. So in the tourism sector, for example, if you come on a working holiday visa, it's an open work visa, and you can be paid anything you like as long as it's above the minimum wage. Now, who has a working holiday visa? Well, it's predominantly people from European and North American countries. So
sure.
if you're hiring a European person on a working holiday visa, you can pay $21 an hour. If you want to hire an Indian, you have to pay $25 until April next year, and then after that, $27.76.
Well, yeah, I think probably you have raised a very valid point. Since last couple of years, we have seen that this government has shown proclivity of taking decisions based on visa waiver, the so-called visa waiver, or which are predominantly, as you say, European and North American countries, and another set of rules for non-visa waiver countries of Asia, including India as well. Earlier, it was in terms of border opening, as we have seen in the 5 phases of border opening, in the way they can bring their partners. And now we are seeing in terms of this hiring the migrant workforces. So there seem to be quite bias in that space as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's even more. Something we can talk about later is the chefs that work in ethnic restaurants. There's the discrimination against them as well. It's throughout this government's immigration policies. There is a very clear anti-Indian bias, in my opinion. They're not going to express it as such, but once you go down into the details, they just find other ways of describing people from countries such as India that are discriminated against, and that's how they feel about the international students and the export education.
Exactly. I was going to say that the major gist of the announcement around international students, which came out this morning, is that government would be working to explore new markets of international students. And the first visit that is being planned by Education Minister, Mr. Chris Hipkins, is going to be in USA and Brazil and Latin America market. So they are not going to the existing market, that is the Indian international student market, which have been the single and second largest and the first largest source of sending international students to the previously $5 billion strong international education market industry here in New Zealand. And they are investing their energy and time into expanding or finding new markets, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely. They clearly don't want Indian students anymore, and that's obvious. And that helps explain why they also make it incredibly difficult for Indian workers and residents to bring in their partners, for Indian workers to come. I mean, it's across the board where they're just making it more and more difficult, and that's been known, for 4 or 5 years now through the government documents. You can see where they have particularly targeted Indian nationals, and that's why the people stranded in India with the work visas are not going to have those work visas returned to them or extended, because that's part of the government program is to rid the country of Indians on temporary visas.
Well, yeah. Now, since we are talking about international students, let's go more and talk a little bit more in detail about the announcement that was made yesterday and also today as well. So another important thing that comes out of that announcement is that the future international students coming to New Zealand will be able to apply for post-study work visa or post-study work rights only once, which is again a major departure from the current, what is available now. So what do you have to say about that, Alastair?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of them. But I mean, I think even more significantly, that is the fact that the postgraduate job search visa, the open work visa when you graduate, is now going to be limited to only very few people. Basically, it's going to be for those doing bachelor's degrees or higher. And for those people with level 7 qualifications or below, it's only going to be for those qualifications in occupations which are on that green list. So there's probably only 4 or 5 qualifications in there underneath degree level, which will qualify for the open job search visa after finishing study.
Right, which means that it's not going to be easy to be coming on level 5 or level 6 courses here in New Zealand.
It'll be impossible. It will be impossible, because the way that Immigration New Zealand are going to process student visa applications is they're going to want to look at what they call the bona fides, the ability to return back to India. They know that the level 5 and level 6 qualifications are pretty much worthless back in India. They have no value whatsoever. So therefore, they know that there's no incentive for the students to return back to India with a level 5 or 6 qualification. Therefore, they're going to be assessed as not being genuine bona fide temporary entrants. Therefore, they're not going to be granted student visas. So it's basically killed the student visa market in India completely.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, it is indeed a very significant implication of this announcement. But as you say, that probably government will not come out and say that this is their intention. But yes, we would be, that would be an outcome, and probably we will be hearing more on this very soon from other quarters as well. But other thing is,
well, one comment that Chris Hitchens made yesterday, in his capacity as the I think it's tertiary education minister, he talked about the fact that a lot of these changes are because of the exploitation in this particular student market. Now, so why are Indians being targeted? Do they exploit workers more than other nationalities? Well, no, they don't. They report exploitation more, whereas other nationalities don't report it for a number of reasons. So because Indians have come out and reported exploitation more, they're seen as being an ethnicity that are vulnerable to exploitation, and therefore the changes in the immigration policies are trying to target those particular types of study and work where those ethnicities tend to study and work, being the Indians. So that's why Indians are being punished for coming forward and talking publicly about exploitation and reporting exploitative employers.
So it is a case of killing the messenger, isn't it?
Yes, it is killing the messenger, because actually solving the problem is too difficult for the government. So it's easier to blame the victims. But this government has been blaming the victims of migrant worker exploitation ever since they came into power in 2017.
Surely it is. All right. Okay. And now coming back, and let's take our focus back to that immigration rebalance that has been announced yesterday with so much of fanfare. And we have been told that the intended goal is to attract high-skilled migrant workers here in New Zealand. Now, an important part of any skilled migrant workers when they choose the destination to go and work is their ability to take along their family as well. And one thing that we know, other comparable countries like Australia, Canada, and United Kingdom, they have always given the partners of such potential skilled migrant workers the ability to get an open work visa and to go and work in any field. So that was the case with New Zealand as well till now, where any incoming migrant worker, temporary migrant worker, had the ability for their partners to get open work visa. So under this new immigration rebalance, now government is proposing, or has already made up its mind, to take that ability. So now the migrant workers and the partners will have to apply the new accredited employer work visa to be able to find work. So what do you make of this, Alastair?
Well, let's look at one occupation as a good example, okay? So let's look at registered nurses in the hospital system, all right? So we've got an incredible shortage of nurses. So We have policies to attract the doctors, but the doctors can't do their work unless there are nurses there as well. So great, you can attract a brain surgeon, sure, but a brain surgeon's not going to be operating unless they have a team of nurses around them. So the nurses are not included on that immediate residency green list. They have to work here in New Zealand for 2 years first. Okay, so let's imagine you got a nurse coming from India, say Kerala, for example. They provide a lot of registered nurses to New Zealand. So the nurse comes here and they discover that they can't get residency until they've worked here for 2 years. They then discover that they can't bring their husband in on a work visa to work. They can only bring their husband in on a visitor's visa. Now, if the person is working here in New Zealand and wishes to go back to India to get married during that work time, then of course the government policies are also saying that because you're going back to India to marry, then you're not actually in a real partnership. Therefore, you must quit your job and go and live in India with your husband before you can bring your husband back. But then, of course, you can't bring your husband back because you have already quit your job. So none of it makes any sense, because they're basically making it impossible for those nurses from Kerala to come here with a husband who's able to work.
Surely, well, that's quite well explained. I think, yeah, you have quite rightly raised another issue that even the mess of partnership visa is still to be solved since last many years. And now what we are seeing is that the eligible partners would lose the work rights as well. And this might apply to other category of workers as well. Suppose if we are bringing in other categories of workers who are coming here on different work visas, a new say IT graduate or something who's coming out here on a skilled work visa, if their better half doesn't have the ability to work for 2 odd years by the time they get their residency sorted, they are increasing a huge cost, and not sure if it will be incentivizing them enough to choose New Zealand as their destination, isn't it?
No, it's a massive disincentive, because one thing that this government doesn't seem to understand is that we're actually competing with the rest of the world for skilled labor. So we talk about the nurses from Kerala. They've got options. They can come to New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom, America, Canada. They can choose any one of these countries to come and work. Now, we pay the lowest out of all of these countries, and we're also requiring people to wait 2 years before getting residency, unlike these other countries, and they're not allowed to bring their partners, unlike those other countries. So how do we compete for these occupations which are in such high demand when we've actually got nothing to offer them? It doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical.
It is definitely, and that's why probably I am running short of questions as well. Now the other thing, Alastair, that we have been hearing since last couple of years is the work of Productivity Commission. We have been hearing that this Productivity Commission, commissioned by this government, has been working to plan and assist in immigration rebalance in a way that New Zealand retains its so-called attractiveness for the global skilled migrant workers, along with that solving the so-called problems that this country has been facing because of migrants, which we have been hearing in the last 4 or 5 odd years. Every time elections, we hear it more frequently. So do you think that the work or the suggestions made by Productivity Commission has been adhered to by this government, or do you think they have missed the goalpost at all, or altogether?
No, so you remember in 2017 when we had the net high migration, which we talked about before, there were really 2 talking points that that the politicians had, and that was particularly the Labour Party focused on the fact that migrant workers were causing a stagnation of the wages of Kiwis. So they were keeping the wages of Kiwis too low. So that's where this whole idea about migration being bad for the pay rates of Kiwis came from. And the second thing was the infrastructure strain. So these are the 2 planks of the government's immigration policies. So then they created this Productivity Commission to go and investigate the evidence, so that, and they put in someone who was known to be a sort of Labour Party adherent, to run this Productivity Commission, so that they could get evidential support for that. Now, unfortunately, the Productivity Commission came out last year with their interim report, which basically said that there is no evidence whatsoever anywhere in the world which shows that migrants drive down the wages of local workers. In fact, the net gain on salaries is positive. with migration. They then also said that the strain on infrastructure, housing, public transport, education, health system, etc., from migrant workers was negligible. It was next to nothing. So the Productivity Commission came out and didn't provide any evidence to support immigration's policies. In fact, they basically said the opposite. So since that interim report has come out, the government no longer refers to the work of the Productivity Commission, and they basically just ignore it and they never talk about it again because it came out with results which are the exact opposite of what they built their policy on.
Right. Okay. Well, no, thanks very much for that interesting insight on the work, first of all, of the Productivity Commission and how it has been ignored now. Now, let's go back and try to understand this whole immigration rebalance from a different perspective. It has been suggested that this immigration rebalance and the ensuing policies would be making the lives of future migrants more easier. The processing will be reduced, the processing time will be reduced, the delays will be the days, the story of the past. So let's talk about that pathway to residency. Do you agree with that assertion that government makes, that this whole rebalance will make the lives of future migrants easier in any way?
Well, it's not going to make it any easier than it was pre-COVID, because as I said before, it's basically exactly the same. It's just been given a new name. So if you were a registered doctor before, it was a very simple residency visa process and it was very fast. So what they're saying now is that for those people, it's going to be a very easy process and fast. So nothing's new. They're talking about the work visas as being more streamlined and easier because they can do an accreditation application in 10 days, and then they can do a job check in another 10 to 20 days. So what they've done with the work visas is they've divided it up into 3 different processes, and that have said that they expect to process each of these applications within that shorter time period. But really, those 3 parts of the process is just the old work visa process split up into 3 different parts. So let's say while the old work visa used to take, say, 6 weeks to process, it was made up of 3 parts. Now it's going to take, 1 week, 2 weeks, and 2 weeks. So it's basically exactly the same. It's just that they divided it up into 3 sections. So nothing's really going to change. I don't see any reason why the processing times will change at all. Now, the government have already said that the 2021 residence visa category, originally they said 80% will be decided within 12 months. They've already changed that. They'd sneaked that into the small print yesterday and hoped nobody would notice. But now they've come out and said, 80% within 18 months. So we're already working towards a blowout of that category to go up to the 2-year processing time, which we had the same problem with the skilled migrant category 2 years ago.
Right. Okay. No, that's quite well explained. Thank you very much, Alastair. I think we have discussed most of the topics that we have come across.
How about chefs? Let's talk about chefs for a minute, shall we?
Yes. You have taken the question out of my mouth. Actually, I was going to ask that.
I know that's because it's lunchtime and we're both starting to get hungry.
Yeah. And talking about that, probably I would like to. Somebody was saying to me, I don't know, somebody was saying to me that the days of us Kiwis enjoying the ethnic food in ethnic restaurants all around New Zealand seems to be over after this immigration rebalance. So I thought I will check with you, Alastair. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it seems like our Prime Minister has decided that no longer should we enjoy the exotic flavors and tastes of Asian cooking, and we must now all eat Kiwi food. So it's going to be boiled potatoes and boiled vegetables for all of us from now on. So what they're basically, sorry, let me just turn this phone off from ringing. Basically what they're saying is that, look, a lot of the chefs, in fact, most of the chefs that come from Asian countries, whether it's, India, China, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, they basically learn their skills on the job through the work experience. Some of them will have, 6 months of training, or they get training in a small cooking school. But it's really the work experience that makes them skilled in ethnic cooking. What the government is now saying is that if you want to bring in a chef from overseas, they must have a formal qualification which is assessed by the NZQA as equivalent to a New Zealand level 4 cooking diploma. So it includes the same subjects as a New Zealand cooking diploma, such things as, how do you cook pasta, for example. So, so now you're expecting an Indian chef to have completed those same subject areas in a qualification in a school which is recognized by NZQA. Now, my experience over the last 25 years is that the very few qualifications in India or other Asian countries which are assessed by NZQA as being equivalent to a New Zealand cooking qualification. So that basically means that those chefs who previously were being brought in to work in Indian restaurants, Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, Malaysian restaurants will no longer be able to get work visas to come into New Zealand.
Definitely. And I just want to add on that, definitely there is no qualifications that would have been assessed by NZQA. But more importantly, predominantly, 80 to 90% of so-called chefs who from these countries, India, China, Vietnam, who work in that industry and who are keen to migrate to countries like New Zealand and work here in hospitality industry, they are not formally trained chefs, who goes to a university or a school to get that degree. As you have rightly noted, that they work in industry and gain that work experience. And I'm not sure from where this government is having that imagination that highly qualified five-star restaurant, five-star hotels chefs would be choosing New Zealand to come over here and work in our hospitality industry. So I don't know from where the thought is coming.
Yeah, well, again, it's just basically targeting, particular communities, particular ethnic communities, that they just don't want migrants from those ethnic communities. We used to have a whites-only immigration policy in this country for a long time, and we're basically returning back to that. It's, white is good, brown is bad. That's the government messaging here.
Well, yeah, I think, that's you are coming out and saying that. I'm pretty sure that, yes, we will be hearing a lot of backlash, a lot of hit back from the government, from the ministers who won't agree with you on this. But from what we have discussed so far, I think the implications do suggest that is the case. But we will keep on debating on that. We will keep on discussing on that. And we will see what is in store. One final question before I let you go for today, Alastair, because I do envisage that we might be coming and speaking again on this so-called immigration rebalance. So how confident are you that this so-called immigration rebalance will eventually be able to attract the elusive and high in demand globally migrant skilled workers to New Zealand?
Well, it's nothing. It's not adding anything that previously existed. So I don't see that there's anything new that they're doing to try and attract these high-skilled migrants. It's just business as usual. It's pre-COVID business as usual. I mean, ultimately, people are going to make decisions to migrate here based on, salaries, work opportunities, the ability to bring families, that sort of thing. So if you, and a lot of people, highly skilled medical professionals, they're going to look for a country in which they can bring their extended family, elderly parents in particular. So, you get a lot of high-skilled people who can afford to look after their parents. And when they look at New Zealand, they see that there's no opportunities to bring their parents here. So they're not going to choose New Zealand.
Surely. I think, probably from what we understand, that government is working with a different priority in a different direction. And a lot of real work has been missed in this so-called rebalance. Will that be a good conclusion, Alastair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I said, they've got an ideological foundation which they've built their immigration policy on. They have got a voter base that they're trying to appeal to. That voter base is one which is predominantly believes that migration is bad and that migrants are not good for this country. And they want to shut the doors and keep people out in the same way that we kept COVID out. The same people who celebrated about shutting our borders to New Zealand citizens returning, shutting our borders to COVID, believe also in shutting our borders to migrants. It's a common theme in the New Zealand constituency when it comes to voting time.
Right. Okay. And one final thing, I'm tempted to comment that since yesterday's decision, we haven't heard a lot of voice from Business New Zealand as well, businesses in New Zealand. From what we are hearing is probably they are kind of welcoming this decision. Do you think that it will take a little bit more time for them to understand the so-called devil in the detail of this announcement?
No, I don't think that they're actually welcoming it as such. What they're basically saying is that, look, we've had a terrible time in the last 2 years. These announcements are going to make that a bit easier from now because they can now plan based on this 31st of July date. So it's making it easier compared to what it was over the last 2 years when the government was making it as impossible as hell. But so it's like you're suffering from an incurable disease, and somebody gives you an aspirin to stop the pain and the headache, and they wipe your sweat off, and that's very welcome relief, but it's not going to cure the problem. And you're still going to say thank you for the aspirin and the and the cold towel to wipe your sweat off, but it's not going to cure you from the cancer.
Sure, certainly. Well, I think that's a very aptly said conclusion for our today's discussion. So thank you very much, Alastair, for sharing your time and sharing your insight on this immigration rebalance. I do envisage that we will have to do this kind of talk a little bit more again in near future to understand what has been thrown our way. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sandeep. Nice to talk to you again.
Pleasure. So that was Alastair McClymont talking about this immigration rebalance. We at Indian Weekender will continue to deal and delve into this issue and what it means for our migrant communities, both onshore and offshore as well. And we will continue to bring you more on this. Thank you very much.